All right, is everybody ready? Let's get started. So Eric, you put me in a really dangerous position. I'm the last speaker. So you know this is National Beer Day. And I'm the last speaker between them and their beer. So, well, you know, I was thinking if you wanted to fill up more seats, you should have had free beer. So I heard you speaking earlier about one of the books that you had liked. So I thought I would share one. It's much different than the book you shared. And every time I read this title, I laugh. And it's a real book. So I'm going to articulate it slowly. The name of the book is Stupid, Ugly, Unlucky, and Rich. And so I was at a conference and I heard this author give a speech and he signed my book. I liked this book so much. I bought 50 books. I gave it to everybody in the office because my thinking was stupid. Yeah, I got that one covered. Ugly. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I got that one. Unlucky. Oh yeah, I could definitely have that one. But I ain't rich. So if I got 3 out of the 4, what do I need to do to get to that 4th one? So I bought his book. But what was interesting is he spent years interviewing 500 successful people in every profession. Russell Crowe was in there. Martha Stewart, I guess at the time she was successful. She was in there. And then he found that there was a common link. And you didn't need, what's the reverse of stupid? You didn't need to be smart. Ugly, you didn't need to be good looking. Unlucky, you didn't need to be lucky. And yet you could still figure out a way to get to rich. So he wrote a book of his analysis of 500 interviews of what made people successful no matter what they did. And it was it's a really easy read. It's kind of a silly looking book, but I enjoyed it. So thank you for having me. I'll introduce myself and our organization to you. So my first name is Thomas. My last name is Insera. My friends call me Chip. So I hope everybody here would call me Chip. I did something crazy after COVID. I founded a new bank. And the name of that bank is Integro Bank. So what I was hoping today is to introduce myself further, the organization. And even crazier, we decided that we don't like banks. And we want to do the opposite of what every other bank is doing. So we invented a new service that no other bank in the world has. And so I really look forward to telling about that, sharing that with you as well. So let me start with the name that we came up with, Integro Bank. So our theory is Wells Fargo and a lot of these large banks, they've lost the confidence of the public. Just this in the last few weeks, banks have been failing. We believe that in order to restore trust in banking, trust is really important. And so we decided to adopt as our core value is integrity. And it's part of our name. It's who we are. But we also never wanted to lose sight of our mission, why we founded the bank. So I want to share with you our mission. But our mission is all about growth, helping small businesses grow. So we've invented tools. We give these tools away for free. That's a pretty good price. Anybody interested in $5,000 worth of free tools? We have those for you. We'll share that with you. And as long as I've got audience participation going, our surveys show 85% of people that are either a business owner or one of the key employees at a small business, 85% are not happy with their bank. So how many people here are in that category that aren't particularly happy with your bank? Yeah, I see some audience participation. So we put those two words together, integrity and growth, and that's how we came up with Integro. So the mission. Now, has anybody watched videos of, is it Simon Sinek, where it begins with why? I don't know if you've seen that particular video. Google that one if you haven't. People today, they don't want just a paycheck. They want something they can get behind and believe in, something bigger than themselves. So we started when we wrote the business plan answering the question, why? Why do we want to found a bank? Why do we want to help small business? I'm going to give you the answer first, but then I'm going to share with you why it's so incredibly important to me. So the answer in our case is we want to help small business because if you think about small business, they are the growth engine of the US economy. And as they grow, they hire people. And as they hire people, that increased employment lifts people up and it transforms lives. So that's our true why. We want to transform lives by lifting people up. So now why that's so personally important to me? Well, to answer that question, I have to tell you a little bit about my background. And when I was younger, I didn't grow up with this goal that I was going to become a banker. Far from it. In fact, I don't think anybody grows up as a kid saying, yeah, I want to be a banker. But I grew up back east in a really small town outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And this was the time frame when the Pittsburgh Steelers were winning all the Super Bowls. So I grew up watching the Steelers, lifelong Steelers fan. And my parents approached me once when I was pretty young, and they said, wouldn't it be wonderful if I could become the first person in the family to ever attend and graduate college? They never had that opportunity. They both had multiple jobs. They both lived paycheck to paycheck. They had no savings. They couldn't afford even a single dollar towards my college education. So they said, well, not only was I going to need to figure out how to get into college, I'd have to figure out how I was going to fund my college education. So I started working and saving for college beginning at age 9. And I started delivering newspapers at 4:30 in the morning before school on a bicycle with a light because it's still dark out. And I received tips only if the homeowners were happy with the service. And then at age 16, I flipped hamburgers after school and weekends, and I saved money from both of those jobs. And I was successful getting into Purdue University, which is in the state of Indiana. And I chose that school partly because it was, of all the universities that accepted me, the furthest away from home. But interestingly, since I had very little funds, the out-of-state tuition at Purdue was cheaper than the in-state tuition at Pitt and Penn State. So it made economic sense. It was also kind of cool that the first and the last men on the moon are Purdue graduates. And so it's kind of a high-tech school, and I was interested in technology. So I go to Purdue. Unfortunately, after the very first semester, I ran out of money. And I faced the prospect of having to drop out of school. So I didn't have a car. I walked to the edge of campus, introduced myself to the first business owner I came to. Just walked right up to him. I'm Thomas and Sarah. I'm a starving college student. I'm going to have to drop out of school unless I get a job. I'm not leaving here until you hire me. And he says to me, well, there's no hiring signs. We're not actively hiring, but he engaged me in a conversation. It turns out, just by pure chance, he had resigned his job at a bank and he founded his own small business. It was just 3 of them at the time. And he was a mortgage broker. And he would package up loan applications to help business owners that were looking for credit to expand their company. And then he noticed a trend over time that a lot of business owners realized that they could create more wealth by buying their office building rather than paying rent. And so there were a lot of real estate transactions. And he became an MAI commercial real estate appraiser to help real estate transactions. Well, since he was an ex-banker, in both cases, when he started mortgage and then he later got into appraisal, his clients were banks. So I worked for him for $5 an hour, and I worked full-time, 40 hours a week, and put myself through college. So I was successful becoming the first person in the family to graduate college. But if you fast forward in my career all the way more recently until COVID hit, I couldn't understand why in the Phoenix area so many small businesses were crushed and had to close. But the mid and the large size companies were doing fine. until I did some research, and I'll share some of that data with you. But I was convinced that the data that's unique in Phoenix led to a disproportionate impact on us compared to the rest of the company. In fact, did you know this? Before COVID, Phoenix was the #1 growth market in the United States for small business, before COVID. After COVID, when all the aid was distributed to small business, we ranked near last in the aid that was distributed to small business. Even worse, if you look at every single bank in the United States combined, all of their lending activity combined, the loan approval rate to small businesses in Arizona ranks last, 50th out of 50 states, dead last. The loan approval rate for small business is last. And then finally, the data that kind of opened my eyes, that aid that was distributed by the government flowed through banks. Arizona and the city of Phoenix rank last in the United States in the number of banks that are based here. So there's a shortage of banks. We rank 50th, dead last of all 50 states. And on a city level, of all the major cities, we're last. So when I started to look through this data and I saw the devastation to small business, but when I look back on my own career, I realized what really lifted me up out of poverty was the fact that I had those jobs at small business. So I felt like I needed to take action to help small business. And I couldn't just complain about the facts that there's a shortage of banks. I had a banking background. Maybe it's time for me to step up and go launch a bank so I could be part of the solution. So I started telling my story with colleagues and board members, some of whom I have here with me today. So Brandon, if you want to raise your hand, is with Integro Bank. Chris is here with Integro Bank. And Genevieve is over here with Integro Bank. So these are my colleagues. If I say anything that's of interest today and you want to learn more about Integro Bank, please grab either myself or one of my colleagues. But I started to share this story. Hey, we want to help small business grow. We don't like the way banks are treating small business. 85% of business owners are not happy. Let's do something different in banking. And people started signing up. They started expressing an interest. They wanted to become employees. And then they started investing their own money. And then before I knew it, just the insiders, the employees, the board, the officers, people that we knew, we had 6.6 million in capital that we raised, which is about 5 times more than a typical startup bank. So we had all this extra capital. So we then invested in hiring and recruiting a world-class team. We bought our headquarters. And then we invented new technology that I'm going to show you. I have a short demo at the end. I'm going to show you the new technology and the service that help. It's all designed to do one thing, help small business grow. So Integro Bank is doing some exciting things. So in addition to engaging the employees and the board in our founding, and they've invested their own money, we invented what we call the Integro Bank CEO Club. Now I know at least one person here has been to a CEO Club event. Is there anyone else here that, oh, actually more than one, we've got at least 3. So look, this is a free service. If you're either an investor, a customer, or interested in becoming either of those, you can go to one of these events for free. So once a month, we invite in a prominent leader, a CEO, an executive, somebody that's built a company. They share their story and they give inspiration and ideas. And it's a networking. You can talk with other CEOs and business owners and executives at small business. And it started small, but every month they've been getting bigger and bigger. And the last one that we held here, we had almost 100 people. So these are business owners all throughout the valley. And then we asked people to give written feedback. And you would be amazed at the energy, the excitement, the enthusiasm. One of the quotes was, I'll see if I can get this right. And Brandon, I don't know if it's exact, I'm as close as I can. Never have I had an emotional attachment with a bank until now. Which really blew me away. Like, who would think that a person could actually have an emotional attachment with a bank? But apparently they really liked what we were doing. They connected with the people and they liked the services. Another one was, I've been a business owner for a long time. If I had only discovered this bank when I was younger, our company would be much more successful today. So, I mean, I could go on and on with the feedback, but I would invite you to attend any of our events. I think you'll find something of value at the CEO Club or any of our events. So why in the world would I want to launch a bank? Well, I've shared that with you. I felt motivated, as do my colleagues, in finding solutions to help small business grow, because we truly believe that if we can help partner with you and grow, that as you grow, you're going to hire people. And then just like my own life, you're going to transform, lift people up, raise people up out of poverty. It worked for me, and we hope to do that with others. So at the end of the day, that's why we decided to launch the bank. Let's talk about the crazy banking market. So I assume some of you have heard that Silicon Valley Bank and other banks have recently failed. Yes. One of the things that I've not shared with you that I will now is some additional information about my background. There's two unique aspects to my background that I dare to say you won't find in any other banker. So number one, the USA federal government has hired me twice in the last two recessions to close 780 failed banks all throughout the United States. So my first assignment was here in Phoenix, Charlie Keating's Lincoln Savings and Loan in Phoenix. Some people remember that. It was in the news every day. Well, apparently Washington liked the way we managed that failed bank. So they promoted me to Washington, and then I closed banks all across the United States. So I like to tell people I learned banking backwards. I learned 780 ways not to do banking. Because all of these banks had every major thing. I mean, they had fraud, self-dealing. I mean, some of this was publicized at the time. So I'll give you an example. A high net worth individual owns a real estate development company. He's the chairman. He also happens to be chairman of a bank. So his real estate development company goes and buys a piece of land 50 miles outside of Phoenix, and he pays $100 an acre. And then he creates on paper 12 different partnerships, and he sells that acreage for $100 an acre. The next transaction is $200 an acre, and then it goes from $200 to $400 an acre, $400 to $800, and it doubles in price. And all these transactions occur over a 2-day time frame. At the end of all these transactions, he says the land is now worth $100,000 an acre. So he paid $100 an acre for it. But now fictitiously, this paperwork suggests that he thinks it's worth $100,000. But then he hires a real estate appraiser and pays him a $50,000 bribe to write an appraisal report saying, oh yeah, it's worth $100,000 an acre. And he takes the fraudulent appraisal into his own bank. He knows it's fraudulent because he paid the bribe. And then he gets the bank to approve the loan to himself. And then after the fraudulent loan to himself, he pays himself $1 million a year to monitor the status of his fraudulent loan. So this is real life. This is what happens in banks. There's fraud, there's self-dealing. It's epic. And I've seen it in 730 cases. So typically when I went in on a Friday and closed the bank, I fire the board, I fire the CEO. Sometimes people are taken immediately to jail. Sometimes we build a case. We file civil suits, we file criminal suits, we do audits. We find out what went wrong, and we hold people accountable. That's how you do bank failures. That's not how they did this bank failure. Typically before a bank failure, 6 to 8 weeks before the event, I'm taking an entire team into a secret location, and we're using code words, and we're planning every detail of how we're going to walk in and close this bank. This failure occurred so quickly, 24 hours. They had no meetings. They had no people. They sent one person from the FDIC, and that's who closed the bank. So the government was not really ready to deal. But let me give you some insights on what's going on And why Integro Bank is completely isolated from all this craziness. Well, first off, I've seen 780 bank failures. So when we wrote our business plan, we made sure that we were going to build an ironclad, long-term sustainable bank that learned the lessons of all these other failures so that we wouldn't repeat that. So in our business plan, we had to submit this to both the state and federal government. And my gosh, getting a bank approved is the hardest thing I've ever done. It's a very difficult process. There's a bank here in town that submitted their plan, raised their money, and got their approval in 10 years. We did it in 10 months. So we have a good team, we have a solid plan, and we have the right people to execute it. But what we said in our business plan was this. Remember, 18 months ago, the economy was doing fine. Interest rates were not going up. We said 18 months ago, interest rates would rise considerably, there would be a recession, and there would be an increased rate of bank failures. So since we knew that ahead of time, we built this bank from scratch to be well positioned when all those things happen. So the first thing I did was I went out and recruited a board that has closed failed banks and then successfully turned around failed banks. So I have a board and a management team that have done that. So we're actually positioned, and we have excess capital to be able to buy failed banks and to help failed banks. So of all the banks in the United States, I think we're probably the single best position, particularly when you hear the information that's causing these banks to fail and how that compares with where we're at. So I assembled a very conservative board, very heavy in governance and infrastructure, several CPAs who have audited banks, 5 former federal regulators, including myself, so we know how banks are regulated, people that have launched banks, and prominent business leaders that know about banking. So we have very strong governance. And let's talk about timing. So fortunately, after I graduated from Purdue, I was able to attain 2 graduate degrees, one of which is from Wharton. When I attended Wharton University of Pennsylvania, one of the best classes I took was an investment banking class that teaches you how do you value a bank. And what I learned was the most valuable banks had 3 things in common. Number 1, they were publicly traded. Number 2, they had something different that sets them apart from their competitors. I'm going to show you what we have. And as a result of that differentiator, they were able to achieve growth, organic growth, that was stronger than their competitors. And then number 3, they used their publicly traded stock as currency that allowed them to buy other banks and other businesses with stock instead of cash. And the stock market liked that they were growing healthy organically and then layering on top of that additional acquisition growth. So those are our plans. We have plans to become publicly traded. We have a differentiator that sets us apart, and I and the team have done acquisitions in the past. In fact, at my last bank, based here in Scottsdale, we started with 5 people, very small business, but we grew so rapidly that we became publicly traded. It became international in scope, and my team and I increased the value of that company 740% in just 2 years. So the 2 things that I mentioned that I have in my background that are much different than other bankers. Number 1, the USA federal government has hired me to close failed banks. I understand the drivers of that. That's helped me and Integro Bank position us to do remarkably well in what otherwise would be considered a challenging banking environment. And number 2, this is my 5th consecutive technology startup company. So I have a track record of inventing new technology, deploying it, and then using that to achieve rapid growth. So that's what sets Integro Bank apart. So let's talk about this craziness in the market. So if you read up on what's driving these bank failures, you'll see a couple themes. And actually, if you go back in history, this has happened several times in US history, so it's really nothing new in terms of bank failures. In fact, I've studied bank failures going back the last 300 years. How many people can tell me just in the last 100 years, how many banks have failed in the United States?
698.
17,000. How many banks exist today? 4,700. So more have failed, 3 times have failed than actually exist today. Fortunately, though, of those 17,000, 16,000 of those were around the Great Depression. So that's when they invented the FDIC and they invented deposit insurance. And since then, the rate of bank failures every year has started to decline. And the government gets better at helping to prepare. So we as a bank, we pay into deposit insurance, which goes into a fund to help absorb the costs of these bank failures. So other banks are paying for it. So what's driving the failures today, and some people may not know this, but of the 4,700 banks that exist today, that's a lot of banks. Banks hold a lot of other people's money. And they know that they don't need that money immediately, so they invest it. Sometimes they make loans with it, and sometimes they invest it. Well, if you add up all 4,700 banks, they have invested $6 trillion in long-term bonds and securities that were purchased when interest rates were zero. And the way bonds and securities work, if you buy them when interest rates are low, as interest rates go up, the value of those securities and bonds goes down. So that means the 4,700 banks in the United States, all of them except us, are now facing up to $1 trillion in losses. And so at each individual bank, when those losses are high enough, like Silicon Valley Bank, you have a run on deposits and you have a failure. So you have to dig into the details of the financials of what that bank has invested in to understand if your bank is at risk. There are very large banks whose names you would know who are on this list today. So the irony is a lot of people are moving their money to the big banks thinking that they're safe, and I know for a fact that some of them are not. In fact, I'm on a special government task force that if one of those banks fails, I can get called back up and I have to go back on active duty again to help the government close banks. So don't assume that just because your bank is big, that they're too big to fail. So let's talk about too big to fail. So I worked at the division of the FDIC that closed banks. There was a period in US history where the government would have been unable to close a big bank. So think of the top 10 or the top 20 largest banks. The legal problem that existed for the government, they're only authorized by Congress to regulate the bank. But these corporations are so sophisticated, they would own a bank and 20, 30, 40, 50 other corporate entities that they're not allowed to touch until the laws changed after the last crisis in 2008 and Sarbanes-Oxley and some other legislation. Now, the government can go in and take over a large bank, no matter how many different corporations and entities that it has. So they now have a mechanism in place. So there is no more too big to fail. In fact, the top 50, actually the top 100 largest banks, they have to write a living will that says if they fail, this is how the government's going to take you over and come in and manage that crisis. And it's actually step by step, it's all written out. They have to give that plan to the government. And then the government can either use that plan or use their own plan. So there is a way for the large banks to fail, and some of them are on shaky ground. Integro Bank is probably, it's the only bank I know of. I guess there could be others. I haven't researched all 4,700. We did not invest in any, zero long-term bonds and securities. So we are one of the very few that have zero risk exposures because, again, 18 months ago when we wrote our plan, we saw this coming and we did not want to have those risk exposures. So you said address your sales objections on the front end. Don't be afraid to do business with Integro Bank because we're new or we're small. We're actually financially much better shape than every other existing bank in Arizona and probably 99% of the banks in the United States. Zero bonds and securities. Now, another thing that's causing these failures, also Silicon Valley Bank, they had high concentrations of risks within certain types of customers. And when those customers started to have problems, then that can take down your bank. We have no concentrations of risks. We have a very broad customer base. And then finally, we're not yet publicly traded. So our stock price can't, by the way, there's a bank here in Arizona whose stock price went down 80%. I'm not in the business of, pointing out specific banks or bad-mouthing my competitors, but there is a bank here in Arizona whose stock price has gone 80%. That would be something that would be worrying me if I was either a shareholder or a customer of that bank. We don't have volatility. We're not publicly traded. We just raised all of our capital. None of it is invested in these risky investments. So Integro Bank is in really good shape. So let's talk about our differentiator, and I actually have a few slides on this. We have the Integro Bank CEO Club. I'd like to invite everybody. So we're big into LinkedIn. So grab my business card or any of my associates. Follow us on LinkedIn. You'll get announcements of when our events are being held, and you can sign up and attend those events. So what we've invented is called Integro 360. It is a full suite of services, and I'm going to describe those services to you in the next couple slides. But before I do that, let's talk about the CEO Club. So the objective of the CEO Club, and by the way, there are CEO clubs here in town that charge anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000 a year for you to join. So we'll let you into ours for free. All you have to do is become a customer or an investor of the bank, and you get your first meeting for free. There is a way to pay an annual fee that's much lower. I think it's $2,900, something like that, which is the lowest of all the CEO clubs. But we would much prefer to earn your business as a client. It's all about networking. So you'll be able to meet other business leaders, all businesses of all types, and you'd be surprised at ideas you'll pick up. Even businesses that are not in your industry will give you ideas on how you can grow your own company. And we're really big into coaching. So we like to align ourselves with coaches and companies that do coaching because the coaches in turn really love the free tools that we give out because they know that they'll be valuable tools to help any business grow. So let's talk about these free tools. We have them bundled in an 8-step process that we invented. So let me walk you through the 8-step process and describe some of these free tools to you. Now, in steps 1 and 2, we have implemented some new technology that allows us to send information back and forth securely with clients. So here's why that's important. So let's say you're a business owner and you need a loan, and maybe you apply with Wells or B of A or one of the large banks. You'll have to supply them with your tax returns, your financial information, personal and business, and they'll print that out and hand it to somebody in their back office who manually rekeys every single piece of information. They retype it. We don't have to do that because we have a process where you can send that to us, automatically read it, automatically put it in our database, automatically compare your company to your competitors, and we can instantly see your strengths and weaknesses of your company. And because we do that in real time with artificial intelligence, instead of waiting weeks for the analysis, we can actually start advising you right away. Now, in step 3, we do something no other bank in the world does. Again, we invented this. For free, we will give business owners peer data. Now, this peer data represents 5 to 7 of your competitors. These are companies that are similar in size to yours, in the same geographic area, and in the same industry. And you'll be able to see how they're performing financially. What are their gross and net profit margins? What are their growth rates? What's the valuation? And how do all of those compare to your company? And then it even dives more deeply in what I call the cash flow cycle. How are they managing their cash? The two things that we can look at is how are they collecting their receivables and how are they turning in their inventory? Now, when business owners first see this data, the peer data, they usually have two reactions. First, they say, wow, I didn't realize that I could obtain this. Well, you could go hire a consulting firm and spend thousands of dollars, or you can access this data for free at Integro Bank. I'm not aware of any other bank that will provide this information to you. And then in step 4, and by the way, that's a free tool. We'll give you that information for free. In step 4, another free tool, we give you and your company a free business valuation. And this is where our conversation with each individual business owner can get very interesting. Let me give you an example of one. Look, thank you for telling me about your business and some of your long-term plans, but based on your cash flow today, your business is worth $500,000. But what's interesting is the peer data that I gave you. So let's take a look at that together. You'll notice in this peer data that your competitors are collecting their receivables on average every 28 days. And they have inventory, and they're turning that inventory by selling it every 35 days. But when I compare those metrics to your company, it takes you 70 and 75 days to do those same two things. So here's what's happening. Every month, your competitors have extra cash that you don't have, which allows them to hire more people, purchase more inventory and raw materials, and they're able to achieve higher sustainable growth rates. In fact, it also interests me from the peer data that your competitors are growing 20 to 30% every year, but your company is growing 2% every year. So understanding cash flow and how that's affecting growth rates of your business and how that compares with your competitors, there's something to be learned by looking at your competitors. Now, I also understand from our conversation that every business owner has a different timeline and exit strategy. And you talked about wanting to retire in 15 to 20 years and taking your business that's worth $500,000 today, and maybe you want to build it up and sell it for 10 to 15 million. Well, if you're only growing 2% per year, that's going to be a real challenge. But if you take this time to study and learn from your competitors with this peer data, and you can get your growth rate up closer to their growth rate, now you have a shot at getting to the 10 to 15 million a year. So that's the peer data. Now that actually leads to the next two steps that are also for free. So the next step is a customized dashboard that we build specific to each business. And you will each get your own username and password so you can log in to your dashboard. This dashboard will show how your company compares to your competitors. It'll show your business valuation compared to your competitors. But this is the most amazing part, and we invented this, and I don't know of any other company in the world that has this. On your own dashboard, we've isolated the 6 key variables that impact your profits and the value of your business. Those are the ones you need to stay focused on. Well, you can hypothetically say, this is how I'm managing these 6 variables today, but if I change variable number 1, how would that affect my growth rate, my profits, and my value? And that information is going to help you dial in on the changes you need to make and how you're managing your business. And you test each of these 6 variables separately. And that allows you to come up with a customized roadmap, the optimal way for managing each of your companies to achieve the highest profits, growth rate, and value. And it's a real-time tool. So as the market changes and as your company changes, 1 month you could be behind plan and your value's down, and you say, okay, I'm going to change this, I'm going to change that. The next couple months, you measure that change. And so you're just getting better and better and better each month. Now, when we first invented these tools and we tested these tools over a 4-year period with business owners, I'm going to share with you the results. They're remarkable. But what we did when we first invented this, we gave all this data to business owners and we found that they didn't know what to do with it. So that introduces the next free service, and we call it a feedback loop. And this is what ties in really nicely to coaches and professionals to help you. Our bankers are trained on how to help you access this data, how to compare your company to your competitors, how to understand your value, and how to understand the levers that you can pull and the changes you can make to maximize your value. We won't go into your company and roll up our sleeves and actually help you make the changes, and that's where a coach comes in. So accessing this data and leveraging it by working with a professional who can also help you evaluate this data, very powerful tool. So let me tell you, I'll share with you what we learned over a 4-year period. So I went to a bank in California that was this close to being seized by the federal government as a failed bank. The board hired me. I come in, we successfully turn around the bank. It went from highly unprofitable, losing money, to record-breaking profits and a tremendous turnaround story. The only bank in the entire state of California to be ranked as a top place to work because of the favorable work culture. Everybody loved working there. We had an engaged workforce. We did it with the help of coaches, by the way, and this data. But it wasn't just us. So over that 4-year period, we had dozens and dozens of success stories. I'll share 1 or 2 with you, but let me give you the bottom line first. Dozens and dozens of success stories. But what we found was that the businesses that accessed this data and had the coaching feedback loops with our bank and other coaches, they grew so quickly that there were 2 surprising outcomes. They started selling their businesses for cash, ranging from 20 million to 200 million. Number 1, they came to our bank and said, wow, home run, this really works. They agreed without any fee, just for free. They were so happy. They recorded a video testimonial of how wonderful these tools were, and we had all this free advertising. But the second outcome that really surprised us, it was actually to the bank's detriment. When the owner had all this cash, say 50 million in cash, they said, hey, home run, I got all this money. Will your bank help me invest that money? Well, the bank that I was at did not have any wealth management services. So we started to lose customers. So I decided to leave that bank and we decided we needed to do 2 things differently at Integro Bank. Now, the other problem the bank had, 90% of the business owners found these tools so powerful, they closed all of their bank accounts no matter where they banked, and they joined our bank. So we had a 90% successful close rate with customers. Very powerful, very impactful on their business. But the problem for our bank was for us to provide these services to each business owner behind the scenes, it took our bank up to 30 hours of labor to manually process all of this data and present it. So we decided, number 1, we needed to invent technology to process all this data, organize it, and present it. So we can do that in minutes when it used to take 30 hours at my last bank. So it's the same tool, just automated. Much more powerful, much more convenient for business owners because now you can access this from your cell phone, your laptop, or your computer. You don't even have to come into the bank. At my last bank, we were driving to locations or they were driving to us. This is all digital over the internet. The second thing, we created Integro Wealth Advisors because we're so confident this will help businesses grow. We want to be in a position to help them invest their money. So here's a real life example. Who has heard of the drink kombucha? So if you go into any convenience store or most grocery stores, chances are you'll find it's a fermented tea. It's called kombucha. Earlier versions of it existed in Europe and Asia, but there was a husband and wife that first invented it in the US. And when they brewed up their first batch, they did it in their garage, just as a hobby. And they gave free samples to their neighbors, and they started placing all kinds of orders. They loved it. They brewed up batch number 2, and they gave it to all the local convenience stores and grocery stores. They started placing orders. And then they panicked. They had never run a business. They had no office, no equipment, no cash, no line of credit, no way to hire people, but they had all these orders. There was not a single bank in the United States that would lend them money except our bank. We listened to their story. We saw all the evidence of the orders, and we sat down and gave them their valuation, and they fell out of their chair in disbelief. And we said, look, once a month, we find business owners get really competitive. They want to, once a month, give us their updated financials because they really want to know, are they getting better each month compared with their competitors, or are they falling further behind? So they came in once a month, sometimes quarterly, and they got better and better. They followed our advice. 3 years after they met with us and we gave them their loan, 3 years, they sold their business for what we had valued at. So it proves the accuracy of the business valuation. They sold their business for $100 million to Coca-Cola. They were in their garage when they started. So we know that this stuff works. Now, the last 2 steps are the impact and the transformation of businesses. And we had 4 years of success stories and videos proving that this works. Well, this is now brand new in Phoenix. We've just launched this. We've just started to advise customers. So now there's an opportunity for us to help small business here in the Phoenix area grow. And then long term, we have aspirations to be national in scope as a bank. We are allowed initially businesses in California, Arizona, and Nevada, and 20% of our business can be nationwide. But as we get bigger, 3 years down the road, we can expand that. So here's how Integro 360 works. It's a consultative approach. It's like coaching. We're going to give you access to data. We're going to compare your company performance with your competitors. That's the competitor analysis. And then the valuation tool can be updated as often as you'd like. Every month, every quarter, every year. Are you going up in value or are you declining in value? Now, it was a tool not just for the owner, but for the bank. Because we track their performance monthly, they track their performance monthly. So there were some businesses that started to decline. And we would approach them and say, can you develop some type of a corrective action plan because you're off track? Maybe your expenses are growing faster than your revenue. So something's not right here. Maybe your cash flow, you don't have enough cash flow to pay all your bills. So we have an early warning system now at our bank that no other bank has. At every other bank in the United States, if you get a loan and you close the loan, once a year you will supply your tax information or your financial information. So they have no early warning indicator that there's something amiss or there's a problem, and they're not consulting or advising you. They have no data. Well, business owners voluntarily want to give us their data monthly and quarterly because that's the only way they can figure out how they're performing relative to their competitors and whether their value is going up. So now we have an early warning system. It's good for us and it's good for our clients because we can go back to that client and say, hey, something's off track here. Why don't you come up with a plan B or a corrective action or maybe engage a coach? And 90% of the time, they were able to identify the issue, solve the problem. But if you didn't have that data, there's no bank giving you that feedback loop. You could go a year, 2 years down the road, and now it's too late. You've been in a decline for too long of a period of time, and it's not salvageable. So you need an early warning indicator system like we do. And then for the bank's perspective, it helps us avoid loan losses because in 90% of the cases, even when businesses have a short-term problem, they're able to deal with it and successfully turn around. What was missing is that feedback loop, which is what we provide. So I'm going to end on a short demo It's only about 2 minutes in length, and then I'm going to open it up to any questions that you have. So if you want to queue up the demo, if you guys could just indulge me for maybe 2 more minutes, and then I'll answer any questions that you have. This is what the actual dashboard will look like for your company.
Over 80% of businesses for sale do not sell, primarily because they don't have an exit strategy and do not understand their current or prospective future company value. For the first time ever, business owners have the power of real-time projected valuation and peer-to-peer analysis at their fingertips. Introducing the Integro 360 platform. Harness the power of industry data to benchmark your position within your market segment. The flexible Integro 360 platform is client-focused to minimize the data gathering process for the user. The Integro 360 platform isolates the top 6 variables that impact value creation at your company, shows how you are currently managing these variables, and helps you forecast how possible changes will impact your profits, growth rate, and value creation. This powerful forecasting tool, invented by Integro Bank, helps business owners identify the optimal path forward for improving cash flow, profitability, and business value creation. The Integro Bank Integro 360 platform allows you to visualize your company performance and how it compares with competitors, monitor your company performance over time, and fully leverage the feedback loop, consultations, performance assessments, and valuations. The Integro 360 platform.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, any questions that you have? Yes, sir.
For the life of me, I can't figure out why this happened and who would invest in a bond with negative interest rates.
Well, so no, when they bought the bond at the time in the market, interest rates were either 0 or really low.
In other countries, though, they were issuing bonds at 0.
Oh, 0 interest? That one blows my mind. I don't know the answer to that one.
Pay to own the bond.
Yeah, I don't understand that either. Fortunately, it didn't happen here in the U.S. But you're right. I don't understand how that can happen. Doesn't sound very sustainable to me. Yeah.
You said you're not taking businesses outside of those particular states.
Well, 20%. So we can take some clients. Yeah. Yeah. So our main mission is to help Maricopa County, and then Southern California and Nevada. Because if you look at all 50 states, Arizona ranks last at 50th is the most acute shortage of banks. Nevada ranks 49th, and California ranks 48th. So we're in the most underserved market in the United States that has the greatest shortage of banks for small business. Now think about why that's a problem in Arizona. So all the banks here that dominate this market are top 10 banks. And I've worked at a top 10 bank. I worked at Citibank. It was the world's largest bank at the time. The large banks will tell their employees that they make their profits off of the billion-dollar companies. Don't waste your time on those small businesses. So the reason 85% of business owners feel neglected, it's because they actually are neglected. So our value proposition when we opened was, business owners, you can continue to be neglected, or why not consider owning your own bank? So we are actually owned by 230 business owners who said, hey, I like what you're doing. I want to invest in your stock. So they now co-own the bank. And that's how we raised the money for the bank. So as far as I know, we're the only bank in the country that raised money like that. Usually you get 6 to 8 rich doctors that write big checks. But these people were investing as little as $25,000 to own a piece of the bank. And so now they're co-owners. And now they're co-owners. We call it the 3C approach. They're a co-owner. Now they're becoming a customer. So they deposit. If their business needs credit, we give them the credit to help them grow. And then they get access to the CEO club. So it's the 3C model that we implemented. Yeah.
Do you have any idea how close Oklahoma is? Because on my 1.5-mile stretch road, I have 13 different banks in a 1.5-mile stretch. And so I was just curious if you knew where.
Well, there's only 12 banks based in Arizona in the whole state, and there's, I think, 3 in Phoenix. So we're compared, like if you compare Arizona, 12 banks in Arizona, there's hundreds in California, hundreds in Texas. So I mean, compared to the rest of the United States, it's a shortage. Yeah. But the large banks that dominate, in my view, aren't really appropriate. They're not set up to service small business. They'll accept it, but they're just not giving them a lot of attention. So that's our value proposition. You'll get to know the CEO and the executive team. How many people here have met the CEO of a bank before? A couple. Not many people usually do. And so that's one of the value propositions is you'll know who the decision makers are and you'll have access to the executives. Yeah. Any other follow-up? You're good? Yes, sir.
So brand new startups, there's a couple of them in the room. They can go put $1,000 and open an account, or is it 50,000, 10,000?
$100.
$100.
$100 to open an account. And you can do it online. You don't even have to come in. We have digital account sign up. And we have all the other products that a bank would have, loans and deposits. Although only a small subset of banks do SBA lending, which is more appropriate for startup organizations. And that's the biggest amount of lending that we do is SBA lending. We do all types of lending for businesses, including SBA. Bridge? We can do bridge financing, sure. Yeah. Yes.
So having been there and can say the vibe there is amazing. Obviously, when you guys opened, you wanted to do something different, so you had to hire different types of people. So what were you, just out of curiosity, what were some of the qualities you were looking for in an employee that you wanted to represent your bank?
You know, that's such a good question. So what I learned when we implemented this new technology at the last bank, our bankers that were supplying these services to customers, we had a 300% turnover in years. And it was hard for us to find the right people. And here's why. So for hundreds of years in the United States, when banks hire bankers, they teach them how to sell loans and deposits. And so they're all programmed to kind of push those products on you, even if you don't need them. It's kind of self-serving for the bank. But that's the exact opposite of what we want to do because we don't view ourselves as pushing loans and deposits. We want to be a consultant that helps you grow. If you happen to need loans and deposits, great. But we're talking about Integro 360 and how to value your business and how to get pure data and how to grow your company. When I first hire bankers, I don't know if they're going to make that change journey, that transition from the way they used to bank to the way they need to bank with us. And some people don't make it. So we've had some turnover, but the way that we reduce that turnover over time, and that's essentially what we're now working on, is through coaching. So the same coach that helped us through that transition last time is a big believer in what we're doing because he saw how well it worked. That he's actually donated his coaching. He's a shareholder as well, and so he'll be working with my sales team and I to help on that change journey. Help people realize, okay, yeah, it doesn't seem normal what we're doing because you've never done this before. So you've got to stop comparing what you're doing with the way you used to do it. You've got to learn you got to learn new habits and new skills. So we're on that journey now. We're making good progress because the business development officers and bankers are realizing when they see the reaction of the customers to these tools, they're like, wow, this thing sells itself. So we're going to have some turnover. So we look for adaptability, people that are willing to try new things and to learn. We look for people that demonstrate a core value of learning. We also have, when we hire and when we retain, we have a set of 4 core values that we've identified that are kind of not aspirational, but really reflect truly who we are. Like I shared with you that trust is important to me. I shared with you that hard work and working at a young age and lifting yourself up, that kind of a bootstrap approach is important to me. So we look for some of those values in the people we hire and people that we retain. So that's how we manage it.
In the Phoenix marketplace and the growth that we're experiencing over the last couple of years, have you seen any vertical industries, vertical markets that you're having great success with specifically?
Well, we are, I mean, to me, Phoenix is growing in almost every sector. We don't have any industries that, in order to lower our risk, remember I said one of the risks was if you've got too much of a concentration in one industry. So what we'll actually do is as we acquire customers, and we have, I don't know, the last 120, I think more than that.
How many did you say?
It's a lot more than that.
Did you say 120?
Yeah,
That's just over 220.
220. See, that's how fast we're growing. I was a couple weeks out of date, sorry. So every unique business has a industry code. You can actually look up your industry code. And so we will keep track of all of our businesses by industry code so that we can make sure that we don't have any risk exposure to any one industry. We want to help all businesses. Now, there's a few exceptions. In order to lower our risk profile, we agreed with the regulators and our board, we wouldn't do anything crypto related. We wouldn't do anything marijuana related because presently there's a disagreement between the federal and state law. And until that's resolved, we'll stay out of marijuana. And we won't do high risk payday lending, which the regulators kind of frown upon, which they charge these, 20 and 30% or higher interest rates, kind of rip off consumers. So we won't engage. Those are the three that, and let's see, we won't do adult entertainment. But short of those, we're pretty much wide open in just about everything else. And I'm sorry if I offended those 4 industries if you're here today. Yeah.
How much the owner contribution for franchising in this? Because some banks, they usually pay the 20% and they provide 80%. Or SBA usually goes with 15%. What is if someone's looking at lending and franchising in this or in normal business, what's the difference between how much the owner has to contribute?
Well, so we do franchise lending is the short answer. Every situation is different. And one of the things that we're usually a little bit more agreeable to than most banks is at most banks, they're going to look at your last 3 years actual performance. Now, if you're a startup, you don't have that. Or if you're buying a new franchise, or if you're less than 3 years of experience, you don't have that. So we'll actually look at forecasts. And so it depends is the answer. So we'll look at your forecast, we'll look at your actual performance, we'll look at your ability to execute your plan, and then we'll come to you with a custom proposal of how much we think we can lend to you. Maybe you want to buy a business. So maybe you want to buy real estate. So we'll look at each situation differently. So it's hard for me to give you one answer that would fit every situation. Other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned something about one of the things that you're not, because you don't have public trade stock, but then earlier you said you do want to go public eventually. Is that going to impact the way things are done later on when you go public?
Yeah.
We get more risk.
So good question. We knew that there was going to be turmoil, so we purposely decided not to go public early on. But there's 2 factors that will decide the timing of when we do go public. So number one, we're a startup too. So we have to reach our break-even point. So we have a forecast of when that will be. So it's less than a year from now. But then we want to look at the public IPO market and make sure that it's favorable, which today it's not. But according to our forecasts, if we're different and we have a differentiator and we're able to show how we're much different than the banks that are struggling, at some point, the markets will be favorable and we'll be able to. So when we go public, we'll also use that as an opportunity to increase our capital, which allows us to increase the size of the bank. So the way banks are regulated by the government, We raised roughly 32 million in equity. And the government says we can lend out about 10 times that amount. So that means we have 300 million in loans today that we're ready to start lending out to help businesses grow. Every month, every quarter, we make more and more loans. I guess we have 220 customers now. But at some point, when all that money is lent out, now I need to go raise some more capital, and that's when we'll go public. And so I'll be able to tell the market, hey, we've grown so much, it's time for us to go get more capital. And the stock market usually likes that story. So if I were to guess, probably anywhere from 12, maybe 18 months out is probably when we'll go public. Other questions? I know I'm standing between you and your beer. Yeah.
What are the biggest dictating factors that decide if a small business gets approved for a loan or not? And then maybe some numbers that I don't know if it's somebody talked about corporate credit score and some other things like that. What are some goal numbers for somebody getting to be able to qualify for a small business?
Well, the single most important criteria is, well, before I answer that, let me explain to you how and why banks lend money. So how many people have deposits at any bank? Okay. If your money is at another bank on deposit, that means you're not currently using it. So what banks will do is they'll accept your deposits and they know that you're not going to need it immediately. So nationwide, all the banks on average will take their deposits and lend out about 90% of those deposits to loan customers. Now, what caused a problem with Silicon Valley Bank was they had taken all of those deposits and either made loans or invested them in securities, and when people came to ask for their money back, they had no money to distribute, and they were bankrupt. So banks are constantly gauging how much cash do I have to keep on hand, how much in loans can I make, because I always have to be able to give the depositors their money back. So what that means is banks by nature are conservative, because when I lend money as a bank, it's not my money. If you have a deposit at my bank and I know you're not going to use it, I'm lending it to her. So since it's not my money and it's your money, you would want me to make sure one thing: is she going to pay the money back? So the single most important objective of any lender is to assess what's the likelihood that any one person, I'm not trying to pick on you, sorry, any one person that wants that loan, what's the likelihood they're going to repay me? Now, all the banks in the country will do it in a slightly different way to answer that question, but that's fundamentally what we're trying to determine. Now, they'll do evidence-based. So what has been your history in repaying other loans? That's an indicator that if you've paid other loans, maybe you're going to pay our loan. What's your credit score? That's a predictor of the likelihood you're going to pay your loans. I'll let you in on one secret that I know as a banker, and there's only maybe 6 bankers in the whole country that can say this. So most bankers think that if you had a bankruptcy in the past, or a foreclosure, or you defaulted on a loan, or maybe you were even arrested criminally, or you have really bad credit score, when bankers evaluate these candidates, I call them scarlet letter candidates. Something in their past was negative. Maybe they were arrested, maybe they had a bankruptcy, maybe they had a foreclosure, maybe they had a low credit score, maybe they missed a couple payments. 99% of the bankers out there will not lend to you, because in their mind, they have been trained over 100 years of banking. You don't lend to scarlet letter people because that's an indicator that they may not pay you back. I'm one of 6 bankers in the whole country knows that is not true, because we mathematically proved it. So when I worked at Citibank, I was part of a top secret. I can tell you about it now because it was 35 years ago. And then I worked at 2 other banks where we did the same study. So over a period of 6 years, we purposely made loans to 2 types of borrowers. This group had all those infractions: bankruptcies, foreclosures, they missed payments, they had terrible credit score. And the bankers would normally say, don't you ever lend to those people. So we made loans to those people purposely. And then we made loans to all the people that were the good people. And you know what we found out? This group had a 65% greater chance of paying the loan back than the good group. And this group, if they fell on hard times and they couldn't pay the loan back, the loss that I had as a bank was 65% lower. Citibank was the first bank in the world to discover that 100 years of banking, and even today, 99% of banks today will not lend to this group. But I'm one of the few people that knows, you know what? Mathematically, that's just false. I'm a science guy. Show me the data. The data says that just because you had something in your past, that's not necessarily a predictor. And here's what we're going to look for. Did you learn from it and did you change your behavior? There's somewhat religious answer in here too. The power of redemption and forgiveness. Do you want somebody labeled for the rest of their life, or are you willing to forgive them for their sins? So what I learned was to probe. Well, how long ago was it? And what did you change? And what did you learn? And how have you been doing since then? Now, there is some subset of those 65% of the people, the bad group, the supposed bad group, they're serial offenders. They're always in bankruptcy. They're always in foreclosures. They're always missing payments. Of course, as a banker, we want to avoid that. But most of those people, 65% of them, hey, it was the most painful experience of my life. Today, I'm debt-free, and I've never missed a payment in the last 5 years, and my credit is really important to me, and I went from here to here, and those are the borrowers that we're looking for. And I can tell you from experience, 99% of the banks won't even take the time to hear your story and ask the question, have you learned anything from it? Have you changed your behavior? That's the kind of bank that Integro Bank is. We want to know what happened and why, and to learn you and your story and to get to know you, because we want to, at the end of the day, decide, is it more likely than not that they're going to pay us back? And if we can get to yes by understanding your story, we'll try to find a way. Most banks, as soon as they hear that you have something negative, they're not interested. So that's a key difference between us and other banks. Yeah.
Does Integro Bank keep their loans, or do they sell them off?
Both. So far, we haven't sold any because we're still growing. But in our business plan, some of the business loans, the SBA government program, there's a quirky thing right now that if I, as a bank, make a guaranteed government loan, that guaranteed is viewed as so valuable that I can sell a portion of the loan and get a huge premium, $100,000 profit. But you as the owner will never know that I've done that, because that investor pays me as the bank to continue to collect and service your loan. So from your vantage point, nothing has changed. I'm your banker, you're making payments, you're working with us, but I can increase my profits at the bank by selling a portion of that. Now, we haven't done that yet, but that's what we intend to do at some point in the future. But it'll be transparent. The business owner won't even know that we've done it. And it's just a portion of the loan. We don't sell the whole loan. Other questions? Great questions. Thank you for having me and the opportunity. Eric and the team, thank you again. And have a great weekend. Thanks everybody. Rest of the conference.